Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Geeks and Noobs. We are back. We took a short hiatus because there's been some changes. My co-host Lily is unfortunately no longer able to join me on Wednesdays because her schooling has gotten in the way, but that's fine. That obviously comes first. So with that being said, welcome to the all-new, all-different Geeks and the Noobs, where we will have special guest hosts each week. Also coming up, starting next Monday, OG host Denise Jackson from the original podcast will be back with me on Mondays, and we'll be doing a deep dive into like stand-up comedy, comedic film, stuff like that. And it's called The Depth of Laughter. So that'll be a new podcast starting Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you stick around and check that out as well. Now let me welcome my very first guest, a returning guest of sorts. He's been on before. We've also done the wonderful Wrestle Talk podcast, which we need to do again pretty soon. Ladies and gentlemen, Comic Punk Guy.
What's going on, everybody? Good to be back, man. This is what, 3 times now?
Yep. This is your third time back. You're becoming a regular. I like it. So yes, Comic Punk Guy. Everybody who finds it, you can find him on TikTok at Comic Punk Guy or Instagram. Makes great videos, both wrestling content and comic book content. And make sure you go follow him. Hands down, one of the best TikTokers we got. We are going to talk today about Peacemaker. The show wrapped up with its final episode last Thursday, and to say that it was a revelation for DC, I think is an understatement.
Yeah, I think that DC has kind of found where it needs to go. I think that DC has to have two distinct brands when it comes to films that they make. They need to go in the direction of projects like Joker and the Batman, but also have their cohesive universe have this kind of gunsy outlook, because this has seemed to be the ticket that makes their movies not only interesting, but convey their own sort of comic book flavor and in some really weird ways accuracy that you just can't get from Snyder's type of films that he likes to make.
Exactly. I think with DC, I think part of the problem is you have, unlike Marvel, where a lot of the characters are grounded in a more realistic, like human flawed kind of way. Like that was Stan Lee's approach when Marvel was invented, was to have these more flawed, more humanistic characters. DC's characters are very much more godlike. And while they still get their, like, in the more modern times, they have their human issues, of course. But even Batman approaches God mode in the way he is portrayed, especially when you talk to a Batman fan, but we won't go there. So DC needed something to kind of ground it in a way that even, like, because the thing with Peacemaker is he talked about, like, Matter Eater Lad and stuff like that, like these characters that are like cosmic, future, like way out there, completely unrealistic characters, but it grounded them in this kind of humility and hilarity.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things about including characters like that, and I think a lot of that really started with Doom Patrol, which if no one has watched that, it's on HBO Max. Doom Patrol is fantastic.
Doom Patrol's amazing. I love that show, but I have to point something out real quick. One, Dyson Dishes says, as much as I hate to say it, DC is playing catch up. They are, and that's been their issue from day one. But I just realized, now, when we did Wrestle Talk a couple weeks ago, Matt was part of that, right? Love Panda.
Yeah.
He just followed. That son of a bitch just followed. Where have you been, Matt? But thank you for following.
Taking a DC approach to following you.
Yeah, you did get a dancing penguin, so thank you very much for that. Yeah, I think that, yes, DC has played catch up, because I remember back when the first Avengers movie was about to come out, Warner Brothers swore up and down it would never work. We will never do a Justice League film. You can't do an ensemble superhero film, and we're never going to copy that format. Then Avengers comes out and ends up being one of the biggest movies ever, and they're like, oh no. Oh no. I didn't know the channel name till you were live. You were on the channel, Matt. No, it's fine. It's fine for now. I'll forgive you. Your video was very funny. Yeah. They then, like, so we had 4 years of Marvel already done, and they had already had planned up the full future for the most part. And granted, they went through some business shakeups with the whole Ike Perlmutter being a complete douchebag issue, and then
Right.
Kevin Feige eventually taking over. Um, but even still, they still had a plan, and DC was like, "Oh no, oh no!" And then they also like, in their haste to try to catch up, they saw that everything was running under Kevin Feige, so they're like, "We'll put one man in charge." But they did it wrong because they picked a director instead of picking a producer. And so they try to make
Yeah.
a director in charge of everything, and that makes you
Mhm,
one singular vision.
mhm. Yeah, so I would say that they made two big creative mistakes when they decided to build their universe. They brought in Jeff Johns, who Jeff Johns is very good at singular characters. And when he does or sorry, when he did big event books like Blackest Night was his biggest event that he did for DC, arguably was so focused on Green Lantern and Green Lantern mythology that it was really a giant Green Lantern event and not really a crisis event like some of the other
Yeah.
books handled in the DC kind of timeline. And someone who is better character focused with one at a time, you pair with someone like Zack Snyder, who I wouldn't even say is a good director. He's a really good cinematographer. His movies are beautiful. I think that 300 and Watchmen are a testament to that. Some of the shots in Justice League, as goofy as they can be, were really good.
Yeah.
Man of Steel is still, I think, a solid film.
Yep.
However, movie wise, he's not making movies, I think, from the same place that Kevin Feige pushes directors to make them from. I think that he goes for a spectacle over substance, and he doesn't really understand the characters at their very core. And he said that himself. He said, when I was a kid, I wasn't into this stuff. I made fun of the kids that were into this stuff. And I just so happen now to be the guy who's got the key to making all of their things come true. And this is me giving back to them. And I'm like, well, you've done nothing but continuously to shit on us because
Yeah.
the movies you've made post Man of Steel weren't great.
No.
Batman v Superman, not great, and then his Justice League having to be kind of for granted pretty serious reasons. Joss Whedon coming in to make things even worse, and then the Snyder Cut ultimately not being this giant masterpiece like it was being led out to be. But I think a lot of that came from the Snyder Cut people on Twitter and
Yeah.
people just out there just hyping up something that I don't think could ultimately live up to it.
No, not at all. And like, I do appreciate the Snyder cut of the Justice League, but even that's not good in the sense that that was WB basically, and I think WB did this on purpose because they didn't want to put it out. So instead, they put it all out. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of that movie that can be cut.
Oh yeah.
And instead, they put everything he filmed into it. This is why it's 4 hours long. There's a lot that can be cut from that film. And I bet you if you were to do like a master cut of that, like, and trim some of the fat, it's probably really, really good. But even then, like, you have to go into it knowing that it's not going to be the characters that you know. And I understand, like Marvel is a fantastic example of adapting characters from the comics to video, or to film through inspiration and not interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, every character is inspired by their comic book runs, but not an interpretation of. They are their own entity. It's their own version of it. And it's still, to some people, they still get really pissed. Oh, that's not how the comics are. Like, the Eternals has been a big issue because they made,
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a massive change to the characters. And I think that what DC is going to have to learn, and WB is going to have to learn, is that, and I don't want to, I'm not going to give anything away. I got to see the Batman last night. I thought it was a very good, fairly accurate interpretation of the Batman. Arguably one of the better interpretations we've gotten on screen.
Good to know.
Um, it's this is gonna sound really weird. As much as I enjoyed that movie last night, I really loved it. Like, it's really, really good. I probably won't go see it again in the theaters.
Hmm.
It's 3 hours long,
Yeah.
and you kind of feel it because it
Hmm.
is, at the end of the day, a detective noir story. So for it being that long is a little weird. But it's, again, it's fantastic. Not everybody should go see it for sure. Go see it. It's so good. And Robert Pattinson kills it. Zoe Kravitz, they all kill it. But the difference we get, is that like you said, we're gonna have to have like a multiverse in a way, which is what they said. That it's called the Worlds of DC now,
Hmm.
that's something they announced at the first DC fandom, and they've kind of not really kept up with it. But whatever. Um, because you're gonna have some that are gonna be done, like you said, the Joker or the Batman, and then you've got Peacemaker and the Suicide Squad, and like Peacemaker, especially like Suicide Squad, great film, but I think Peacemaker really shows how this can be done properly because not only was it funny and hilarious and brutal and ridiculous, but it was heartfelt and emotional.
Yeah, there was depth. Like I think those types of interpretations of characters, like Peacemaker, definitely work because Peacemaker as a character is incredibly boring and is nothing like John Cena's portrayal of him that James Gunn had him, wrote him to be. Like Peacemaker in the comics is just paper thin for the most part. There was like a gritty, uh, super like just absolutely dialed to a million gritty reboot of it. I think in the late '80s and early '90s, but there really hasn't been like Peacemaker runs or anything like that that people have really been able to latch onto because it is a charlatan comic before DC got its hands on it.
Yeah.
And the only other real interpretation of Peacemaker we've ever had was Alan Moore's Comedian, which was based on Peacemaker, because all of the characters of Watchmen are based on the charlatan characters that DC wound up acquiring the rights to when they bought Charlatan Comics. So you're really playing with when you use characters like Peacemaker, you almost can't lose because you get to rewrite a character at its core and get to keep the aesthetic, which will draw in, or not so much. You don't have to have a 100% authentic aesthetic, but at least have the characters look alike that will draw people to be like, well, yeah, I do know who that is based off of this, that, or the other.
Yeah.
Which I think winds up working out, especially with all the stuff that was in Suicide Squad with the whole team in the beginning. Those characters have all shown up in one way or another, and those were fairly accurate to some degree depictions of those characters. But if the ones that weren't, it didn't matter because they're disposable. They're not meant for big roles. I knew when John Cena's character survived that I knew that okay, the Peacemaker will come back in some way, shape, or form. And then the show was announced like real soon after that. So I think like using basically blank canvas characters, you can't go wrong, especially when you can kind of tap into these directors that can really put their own spin on it, like James Gunn has. And if you either have two choices with this: either you hand the keys to James Gunn and let him do everything, and DC becomes the mature label superhero content that hits mainstream media, or at least goes into movie theaters. Um, or you let him do everything under a certain guise or umbrella, and then you get your big names to do the team up movies like Justice League and things like that. It really all hinges on how well Flashpoint does.
Yeah, that's gonna be the biggest key is because um that the Flash movie and rumors are, I don't know if I believe the rumors or not about it completely wiping out like Superman and Ben Affleck's Batman and all that stuff and erasing everything. I don't know so much about that, especially since we did see Superman and Peacemaker. But I do expect it to be a big change for their, at least the way they're going to be moving forward with things. But also we've got, we got Black Adam, which is kind of introducing a whole new team.
Yeah.
And introducing Justice Society, which I'm super excited about because Dr. Fate's one of my favorite characters, and Hawkman I love. So that's gonna be great, and it comes out on my birthday, so yay. um, which by the way, also that weekend, the day after my birthday, SummerSlam. So it's gonna be a busy weekend for me. I'm gonna try to actually go to SummerSlam this year.
Oh yeah.
Because that's another bucket list. I did WrestleMania, I've done Royal Rumble, so SummerSlam and Survivor Series are the next two. But we'll talk more about that another time. We'll try to get everybody together. Try to work something
Oh
out.
yeah.
I think it's in Nashville. Yeah, it's in Nashville. Yeah, it's in Nashville. So that is a good city. If we can all get together, that'd be fun. Anyways. But what Peacemaker, like, to put it in its simplest terms, Peacemaker was the closest that Warner Brothers has gotten to anything like Marvel. And I'm not
Yeah,
trying to
I
directly
would.
compare it. I'm not saying that's the benchmark, but it kind of is the benchmark considering how successful it is.
Mhm.
But like it was a R-rated version of something that Marvel would have put out. Because again, it was very funny, very tongue in cheek, but also it had these emotional moments. Um, I've always thought John Cena was a decent actor. Like even in like the shitty movies like The Marine and 12 Rounds, like he does a decent job.
Yeah,
But the dimension he showed in this series, forget I was like,
yeah,
yep, he's really good.
yeah. I think what winds up working really well with Peacemaker is that so Peacemaker as revolutionary I think it was for DC. I will say that if you didn't have the success of things like Deadpool, then you might not have gotten to this point because there are like a lot of similarities between some of the Deadpool stuff that kind of makes it its way into Peacemaker, which for 20th Century Fox movies they're very simple. They're not elaborately drawn out. Neither
Yeah.
one of them are. And they kind of play with the same thing where they introduce characters that are not well known. They're not exactly comic book accurate, but ultimately doesn't matter. And that's kind of the same thing that I see James Gunn doing. So I think there were some cues taken from that. Um, and another really good example of a blank canvas character would be like someone like Vigilante. Like you have the CW interpretation, which I hate, and then you have
Oh
the one
yeah.
that's in Peacemaker that I absolutely love because it's nothing like how he is in the comic books because he's also an inherently boring character in the comic book.
Yeah.
So it's a good. I see where they take the cues from that. The emotional depth that John Cena's character went into was fantastic, and I think that was the missing part of some of the like even something like Deadpool. That if it wasn't for films like Super or that James Gunn also made, or like so even some of the stuff that gets like shoehorned into the boys, even though the boys are just mostly violence and gore first, then you arguably couldn't have gotten to this point where you could have had that much in-depth characters like study, and you're working like almost essentially with a brand new character. But what John Cena brought to that was a lot of like I think of his like real personality. Like if John Cena wanted to play his own comedic personality as a cartoon character, he got to do that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the scenes where he goes off on economists about like the other people he could have framed instead of his father. I think all that was ad lib. I don't
All
think
yeah,
that any of
100%.
that. Yeah, like him playing the piano was 100% real. It was actually
Yep.
him, and like
Surprised the hell out of James
that to
Gunn.
me, yeah, is really not only shows his range and what his talents are, it gives him a well-rounded look. So like I think that there might be serious roles for him on the outs from this, where because I honestly think that apart from maybe one or two more Mania matches and stuff, I don't think that he's really going to ever come back to wrestling full time. I think he's hit that stride that someone like The Rock has done, where they've really gotten there. I would almost say that I would wholeheartedly say he's surpassed Dave Batista now in
Yeah, I
terms
think
of
so.
wrestlers becoming actors and being successful about it. I think that comes down to attitude and some other things, but
Yeah.
I genuinely think that John Cena's acting chops really got put on display here, and I think for the better. You really got to see him play a character with a lot of emotional depth, and he was able to do that for a character that has arguably no emotional depth.
Yeah.
So it was very cool to see him kind of play with a blank canvas and make something basically out of nothing.
Yeah, it's one of those things that like uh hi, what's up? This is a new channel. Yes, yes. I mean it's new-ish. We're revamping, so welcome Amrit to the podcast. Um what I think WB needs to thank their lucky stars in their desperation. They were desperate for something. There was an opportunity because Disney screwed up and fired James Gunn hastily over,
Mm-hmm.
decades old tweets that he'd already apologized for. And Warner Brothers jumped in the chance. It's one of the few things I can say that in recent memory Warner Brothers has done right. And it was out of desperation. And they basically told him, like, look, you have the keys to the entire thing. Do whatever you want to do. We're not going to step in the way like we normally do. You just do you. And it's worked out. It worked out for the Suicide Squad. And then again, if the pandemic hadn't happened, we never get the Peacemaker series because he wrote that during the initial lockdown out of boredom. and Warner Brothers said, go with it. And the post-credit scene that we see where Peacemaker is actually alive was shot much later because it wasn't supposed to happen. What we get out of Peacemaker is, like you said, you talked about how these characters were one-dimensional, they were boring. But what we're also getting, and I think we're going to see this in season 2 based on the final scene, or one of the final scenes, where he sat down and his dad sat down on the porch. Is the ghost of his dad haunting him. Because one cool thing I would say about Peacemaker was that in his helmet, it's all the souls of the people he's killed. And this was after, I think, like his second retcon. But he has to hear, like, that's his punishment for keeping peace. Like, that's his cross to bear. So we're going to get a slight interpretation of that with his father haunting him. And I think that's really, really cool. And I think that brings a whole nother realm of depth. Amaret says, I was talking to my coworker about Peacemaker. DC made a hit. Absolutely, they did. Like, this one, this is true. I mean, a true home run. Every episode was great. It sets up a perfect season 2. You can go so many other places with this character. It created another great character in Vigilante. It actually made you care about the people that work under Amanda Waller. And now she's been exposed, which is also something that happens in the comics. So that'll be an interesting storyline, like a side storyline of season 2, how that falls out. But like the show in and of itself, just looking at it as a show, one, every episode, like I said, was a home run. There was never a filler episode. There was never an episode where you're just like, okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I remember watching WandaVision and I think it was episode 5. I was like, this one's kind of a filler episode. Same thing with Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Same thing with Loki. Every series, there's always been like a filler kind of episode. Although I don't think Hawkeye really had that, but this one for sure, no filler episode. It also created arguably the greatest intro to any show in the history of television.
Yeah, like my girlfriend is not into like the superhero stuff as much as I have. Every time that I've watched it, she would she would like look over just to watch the intro and kind of laugh along with it. Like James Gunn was like saying I think it was in a tweet that he wanted this to be the intro that made you not hit the skip button because everyone does that, whether it's Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, whatever. And like, I know personally, I never skipped it after the first time. So I was like,
not once.
Absolutely ridiculous. And I love every second of it because it's so over the top, but it's a good encapsulation of like the mindset you need to be in to watch something like Peacemaker. It's not meant to be taken seriously. There is no sepia filter over it or gritty, dark, grounded anything in it. It's a very colorful show and plays around a lot with just the overall hilarity of how superheroes work. That's not necessarily shown in more serious movies like what Zack Snyder made.
Absolutely, and I think like another thing that this show did so well is if you look at, I mean, I guess, like WandaVision, there was an overarching villain in Agatha. Loki, it was He Who Remains. Falcon and the Winter Soldier is a power broker. Hawkeye ended up being Kingpin. And superhero movies always have an overarching villain. I mean, you technically had a villain in the Butterflies, but they weren't villains. There's no real villain for the series, and yet you don't even realize it.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
That carries over from the movie, over from like Suicide Squad, where you like the Suicide Squad did a really good job. I think it did miles better than the one that came before it. At like Amanda Waller and Argus as a whole, as long as she's running it, is a terrible, terrible organization doing terrible things. Now, granted, the people that they use to get these things done are bad guys. We're not supposed to want to root for them because they are bad guys. But the inhumanity she shows these people just because they have XYZ wrong with them, or they've done this, or they've done that. And then you see a person like Peacemaker, where like, oh, you are not only like, yes, you're a bad person, you murdered countless people. However, you are an absolute like mental nightmare of a person who has been through unimaginable shit. And Amanda Waller you see it in the series, going extra steps to make sure that she keeps him exactly where he's at, and what she probably thinks is an interest in national security or something like that,
Yeah.
not let him run wild. But then you see through his interactions with the team that he's on with Vigilante and things like that, that like he could theoretically like blend right in and nothing bad might happen. But Amanda Waller's prejudgment on someone like that, and maybe like not going the route of trying to get someone like that help versus locking them up, throwing away the key, and only letting them out for these like Suicide Squad type missions. So it makes her look way worse than even the Suicide Squad did. And I think the Butterflies were it was a good antagonist for the show for the time that they were. And once you realized what they were up to and the reasons why they were doing what they're doing, it made like Murr, who was, obviously was a butterfly, working for Amanda Waller makes so much sense when you realize that it turns that the Butterflies and their motivations were really good.
Yeah.
They weren't
but
not
it was like
wanting to possibly take over.
Yeah, they were good, but they were in a weird, like, almost dictatorship way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they were going to, like, peace by any means, kind of like what the Peacemaker does. And real quick, before we go any further, Amrit, thank you for asking. What other platforms can we follow you guys? You're following us. You're out here on YouTube right now. We're always live on Twitch. So twitch.tv/the Geeks and Noobs. You can follow me on TikTok at Superbeard. You can follow Comic Punk Guy on TikTok at Comic Punk Guy. And you can see it right there just below our names, or all our little tags there. So you can follow us on different social medias. And also, you have a link tree, right? In your bio? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you go to our TikToks, in our link tree is all our other socials and stuff. You can follow us there as well. So thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Yeah, so what the Butterflies ended up being was basically an analogy on a grand scale for Peacemaker.
Mm-hmm.
Humans, they literally talked about how humans... Oh, no, you're good, Amarit. Don't worry about it. Don't... I love the... you're not interrupting anything. Please comment all you want. The Butterflies were an alien version on a grand scale of Peacemaker. And it made Peacemaker question who he was. They weren't villains in a sense. They were a target, but they weren't villains. I mean, granted, the way they were doing it wasn't great, but it's like the Suicide Squad. They're villains because they're in jail, but by the end of the movie, we cared about every single one of them, except for Peacemaker. But then this series made us care about him again.
Right.
So I find that very interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was a good kind of thing when Goff finally explains what and why, and then of course Peacemaker having the internal realization though that like peace by any means necessary might not be always the best way to handle things, stops them anyway. The scene of Judo Master crying, eating hot Cheetos in a field of dead people. Fantastic. Like Judo Master was another character that is just insanely, in terms of comic books, throw them away. They're not important. And like, this was like arguably the most cartoonish depiction of like that character I've ever seen, but it worked so well.
And I think
there's a lot of things that reminded me of, sure. Like
having somebody, he's obviously very small, like makes me look tall. Like I'm 5'8", and he makes me look tall. Like, so next to John Cena, he looked insanely small.
Oh, yeah, look at a child.
But he was beating everybody's ass.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just like, and he shouldn't be alive. Like, multiple shots, all kind of stuff. Was there a special message behind Judo Master? I'm overthinking it. That's actually a really good question. I don't necessarily believe there was a special message behind him, but there is more to the character. And obviously, I believe that scene at the end where him crying, we will see him back for season 2. Like, it's going to become a personal vendetta now. And I think it's brilliant. I think it was done in a way that I don't think he's a butterfly. I really don't.
No, definitely not. No,
I don't think he's a butterfly.
Convinced.
Because all he did was eat Cheetos. He didn't eat honey or whatever that stuff is. It looked like weird honey. He very much is somebody who just believed in the cause. Was a hired hand who, really believed in the cause. And so now it's going to be more of a personal vendetta to get back at this team, who is now very public because of Adebayo coming out and speaking to the media. So I don't think we're going to see, obviously Judo Master won't be like the main villain of season 2, but he'll definitely be like a thorn in the side. But I could also see him maybe joining up with them.
Yeah, I think when you look at some of the other aspects of the show, is you're getting a redemption arc for a character like for Peacemaker, right? Because after killing Rick Flag in the Suicide Squad, I was like, oh fuck this guy,
Yeah,
because I really dug Rick Flag. And when you like the Peacemaker, what a joke that also sets up so much in the series too, because that was the catalyst for Peacemaker to be like, this kind of sucks, and like whether or not he can keep doing what his goal is, and everything with his dad as well. Judo Master, I think I agree with you 100%. I think that he 100% believed in the Butterfly's cause would be the better course of action, and that when as far as he knows, the world is doomed because this didn't work.
Yeah.
And I think that's that'll motivate anybody, I think, especially in this type of setting in the story, to like really ramp up to go after Peacemaker for revenge. Like, you don't understand, you just doomed the entire planet. So I think that was kind of like, you saw the redemption arc for Peacemaker, you saw the redemption arc that the Butterflies kind of go through, and then you're dealing with the repercussions of like, okay, now that Peacemaker arguably isn't on everyone's radar as being an inherently bad person, because now Amanda Waller is, what are the repercussions that fall for that for someone like Peacemaker? And then when you see the Butterflies go through their arc and then they ultimately fail in their cause, now you have someone who's willing to take up their cause and use it against, basically the world or anyone who kind of stood side by side with Peacemaker in a decision to end it. So it's like what it sets up for the next season is huge.
Absolutely.
I literally cannot wait for the second season of Peacemaker.
And I also think one of the most important things was the fact that he kept Goff alive. Like he's keeping Goff almost like a pet, like Eagly kind of thing. But like his like, yes, I made the choice to end this because what you're doing is the way you're going about it is wrong. Not your cause, but the way you're doing your cause. And it's also I think allowing Goff to survive is him also accepting that, look, I had the same cause you had, and maybe it's time for a change. And in that kind of like him hesitating to kill the senator and the kids, him later on admitting that I don't think I want to kill people anymore. Like all that stuff was such growth for that character. And now you're going to see a character who is probably still kind of on the run. Like, even though he's going to be more of a hero, like the team, I'm sure will still be a little bit like in hiding, maybe just hiding from Amanda Waller, but like it's going to be a very different dynamic because now they're also much closer. They're a family now. Like it's very much closer. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that I like the whole thing was that, and this is something I don't think I got touched on a lot. And a lot of people didn't discuss this. It wasn't until the very end that he even realized he was a villain. And I think the important thing was all the discussions he had with like the neighbor. The old man. Like he's like, I'm a fucking superhero. And like, but I don't have a rogues gallery because I'm not a pussy. I actually, kill villains and stop, and he brought up like really good points and stuff like, I love how these movies have made a lot of gray areas in the character development, not depending on a black and white good versus evil writing. Yes, that is a very great point. Is that, and I think that's something that DC lacked for many years in the comics, and where Marvel succeeded better in the comics in character development was that there were human flaws.
Oh yeah.
And like so now you're seeing it in character, and now you're seeing it in the shows. And like I think Moon Knight is going to be another amazing example of that coming up at the end of the month. But yeah, like Peacemaker on a black and white scale of good versus evil, not a good guy. He's not a good guy. He kills people. But then again, we look at the Avengers and we don't say how many people have in the MCU, how many people have they killed? Like they're soldiers. Like Captain America killed a whole bunch of people. Like the beginning of Age of Ultron is them killing Hydra agents left and right. It's how it starts. Like, but nobody bats an eye because it's still pretty clearly defined. They're the good guys. These are the bad guys. But with Peacemaker, it's not as clear of a line. And so he seems like a bad guy because he's killing children. Like any man, woman, and child I have to kill, it doesn't matter. Lines like that. And that's, I guess, the one thing in the comic book that was always like what distinguished him as a villain in a way was that he had no line that he wouldn't cross for what he considered peace.
Right.
And now what the series did was show us that maybe my interpretation of peace isn't the right one.
Mm-hmm.
And it made him second guess a whole lot of stuff. And I thought that was really great. I'd like you to touch on White Dragon, Robert Patrick's character, his father.
Yeah. So in terms of comic book accuracy, White Dragon, they nailed it. That's exactly pretty much at the core who the character is. He's I just lost my train of thought because of how terrible of a character he is. He's an extreme, a extremist, racist, terrible villain, a villain that you don't see very often, a villain that really shows up only in the time where that was possible. I don't think there's been a really modern interpretation of White Dragon. Also, I would not be looking for it.
Yeah.
I think that if White Dragon does pop up again within comic books that are coming out then or in the now, it's going to be under the Black label. I don't think that's something appropriate that should be really pushed out there in main DC titles. I thought that for Peacemaker to have the character development to get out of you're all the way on the bad side of things to being in the morally gray area, the kind of learning, you almost had to introduce someone who is head and shoulders worse than he is. And that's what White Dragon is. Everything about White Dragon was tailor-made to irk you, be awful, because it is awful. It's really showing that if someone with those kind of extremist ideologies were given the same kind of resources as other comic book heroes, the real damage that they could do.
Yeah, absolutely. We froze up there for a second. Let me see what's going on.
Oh, you're still frozen on my end.
Oh, I had a stupid. Hey, you've got new drives that need to be done. Yes, I want to stop this scan. Why are you popping up now? I have you scheduled for like 2 o'clock in the morning. Stupid. All right, hold on. This is going to get really weird for a second. I got to switch cameras to my laptop for a second because that scan froze my other one. So we unplug it. Plug it back in. I know right now I look like shit. Sorry, everybody. There we go.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, just that scan caused it to freeze up. It happens. Yeah, the White Dragon, and this might be where Warner Brothers might have a slight issue with these characters, is that what Marvel has done has brought B, C, D list characters to the forefront and has given them new life in the comics. You can't really do that with some of the characters that he has brought to the attention in Suicide Squad.
Right.
Especially one like, say, White Dragon. But I remember an interview with Robert Patrick, and he was just like, I absolutely loved being a part of this series, but I absolutely hated having to say the things I had to say. And he's just like, it was so awful. But he goes, but it made sense to the character. He's like, I understood why the character would say that, but getting in that mindset sucked. White Dragon is clearly written to mimic a certain extensor group, same with Hydra. My question is it a play on writing? Like, why not use true names such as KKK or Nazis? Well, I do believe the series mentioned like neo-Nazis at some point.
Or like, and there was white supremacist groups.
I also think there was a joke on Ku Klux Klan from Vigilante in the prison.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But I know like the neo-Nazi thing was mentioned about him being like, the white supremacist, the leader of that, like when they all knelt down and white powered him when he came into the prison, yelling the white powder thing. But the thing is that the White Dragon's an actual character. He's an actual character in the comics, and he really was that terrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it
one
is really
dimension,
like
one dimensional in the worst way.
yeah, yeah.
Just
And
bad.
in the iterations that of that character that have existed, none of them have been good, and none of them have like you when you have certain aspects of characters that take from that probably the darkest place of humanity when especially when it comes to things like racism and all that. When you look at what Marvel has done with characters like that, like you have the issues of Black Panther where he's like beating the shit out of the KKK, and that came directly from Marvel telling the writer of that specific run of Black Panther there need to be more white people in it. So he wrote those as retaliation. Or even characters like Baron Zemo, which is arguably tweaked more in the MCU to be an extreme classist versus a racist, and then those types of things. There are stories out there where Baron Zemo is inherently racist. It's him stemming from working with Hydra. Hydra came from the Nazis. That's all in there, but it's not quite in your face the way that it is in Peacemaker. And I think the reason why it was that in your face was to make someone who is undeniably worse than Peacemaker.
Yeah.
And there probably won't be another character. I think in terms of comic book related media and true evil characters and characters that do bad like and have those types of mindsets, he's above Negan, he's above Homelander, he is literally that is the worst character that I have ever seen. And it not a worst like not a like the worst character in terms of like the portrayal or the depiction of him. That character's core personality is absolute dog shit. And like there was some things that were said about it on TikTok that I mean my block list expanded exponentially.
Oh, I'm glad I didn't see that.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. There were some things like we could talk about it obviously off not on here, but like it's definitely was one of the things where I was like, I can't believe there are people who are kind of latching onto this character the way that they did. But overall, I think in the effectiveness of having someone who is undeniably worse, I would even say he's worse than the motivations of the butterflies or any of the things that they arguably
by
did.
far.
He's just the absolute worst character on Earth at this point in time for DC.
Yeah, I can't think of any character. Like, I always thought it was weird, and I always like questioned somebody's morality when they sided with Thanos, when they said that Thanos was right. Like people who are like, like the. But anybody who I promise you, I'll be blocking if I see anybody that's, White Dragon had some good idea, or he wasn't wrong about. Nope, nope. You are an awful human being, and you should not be anywhere near anybody. Yeah, truly just the most despicable character. And that was needed because Peacemaker, by the end of the Suicide Squad, was completely despicable. Like, he was not a character you should have liked. So it was very interesting to see, like, when I saw what happened, because I had heard about the DC, the Peacemaker series before I saw Suicide Squad. As part of, being in the industry, like, as press, we kind of hear these things early. So I knew it was coming. And then when I watched the movie, I'm like, how? How are you making a series about this? And then my thought was prequel. And then my thought was prequel when he got shot. I'm like, oh, it's definitely a prequel now. It's going to show why he is the way he is. Mm-hmm. And then that post-credit scene, I'm all like, okay, wait a minute. This is going to be a modern tale. How do you redeem this character? They did it. And part of what it took was having, like, we all knew his father was, they mentioned how bad his father was, but like bringing in a character like White Dragon, who is truly the most despicable, it was one of the only ways to do it. I mean, you might have been able to still pull it off, but that definitely helped a lot.
I don't think they would have gotten the shock factor out of it because you have like when we knew going in that Peacemaker's father was going to be like a bad person. Like I remember hearing about that. I don't remember anything about him specifically being White Dragon. Like when I realized who he was, I was like, holy shit. And it when he goes and talks to the neighbor and the neighbor's like, well, your race is like also, and he's like, why does everyone keep saying that? So it's like this, he's so accompanied to probably hearing that and that mindset that he probably doesn't see it. He probably, and then as the series goes on, he's kind of like, there's a lot more character development of Peacemaker to when like White Dragon gets his comeuppance. You're like, you got killed by your son, who is bi, who is undeniably bi, told you to your face and then shot you in the head, because you're despicable. But I remember, like, yeah, when I realized who he was, I was like, there's no way. And they were kind of planting the seeds, kind of early on. And then when they had the scene in the prison and they were like the white dragon, and I was like, oh dear Lord.
Yeah,
just
I was like, wow. That was
I
a
can't
pretty
believe that there wasn't a pilot that they showed, that James Gunn showed WB. They ordered this straight to series.
Mhm.
And to let him do that is a huge gamble, because, like I said, some of the things I've seen online, I was like, oh man. And like, if you didn't have this depiction of the character, or attention on the character at all, you probably would arguably not be there. But hey, do whatever you want, and he does this. It's got, like, it had to be a hard decision for that. Like, probably not once they saw the money probably start rolling in for it, but when, for them to be like, well, okay, go ahead and we'll see what happens, because this could have gone way differently if
very
it
much
had
so.
been done, in another light than other than making him who he was.
That's actually a good point too from Amrit. Is the character was brought in to depict what's going on today and to fight against it. Yeah, because unfortunately, it's far too fitting nowadays. Like, I never thought I'd say that, but
Yeah, unfortunately.
unfortunately, I can understand why some people that you had to block identified with it, because that's kind of what's going on today. So I understand where that's coming from. It may be like James Gunn, who's very political and very left, was very much like, hey, this isn't cool. So it was probably part of that was probably part of his reasoning behind it too, was to kind of shine a light on the world, especially considering when he wrote it in the summer of 2020, which
Right.
was an insane time.
Mm-hmm.
But I like to go back to the whole, like, him being bi. Is it just me, or did James Gunn nail bi representation far better than the Loki series did?
I think that they did. However, what has not been, when it comes to bi representation in media, one of the things that I thought has always been lacking is that when you see a bisexual relationship, it's usually two guys and a woman, or a guy, or yeah, it's usually what it is. That's the representation for it. But there's never really been a depiction. I haven't watched Euphoria, so I could be out on that, of whether or not they covered it. But there really hasn't been a depiction of a bisexual relationship between two men, where, like, and arguably the room is there to do that with Vigilante, given the scene that they had. Like, you openly show that this happened, and he openly talks about it, like, in two big moments within the series. It was handled better than Loki, because I feel like with Loki, it's not something that's inherently new for the Loki character. People who read the comics know that to be kind of, Loki's gender is very fluid in the comic books. He's been, female at one point, he's been male at another, he's been, just about everything.
He's been a
So, like,
horse.
I think the shock value, and the shock value really isn't there, I think, for people. I do think the response from the general public about it was very, like, different, because I even talked about it in one of my videos on TikTok, that it was strange to me that the people that were like, "Oh, Loki is a crock of woke bullshit," which I still don't understand how woke is an insult, because all the
Yeah.
things that get insulted for being woke are just people who understand the importance of representation in media of all kinds, and just treat people with dignity and respect, and have empathy for people who have intensely harder interactions with people in life due to their orientation, skin color, religious beliefs, you name it. Um, but the reaction to Peacemaker has been crickets from that crowd of people. But with Loki, it was, this is woke, this is terrible. With Peacemaker, nothing. And I don't know if that's because he says fuck all the time and he shoots guns, or there's something about the character for them that's identifiable with, and that because that aspect is there, they're choosing not to address it. I've only seen a couple of, like, a couple of people that sent me videos in response to mine, saying that, yeah, there were people that said that also, but it was nothing compared to what Loki got,
Yeah.
where Loki's scene was very quick, to the point, subtle, ultimately not as, I would say, not as impactful as Peacemaker's, because Peacemaker is right there in front of you. There was a little jab, I think, about it in Suicide Squad too. So it wasn't something that was really, really as subtle as Loki. It was a focal point, I think, with the demise of White Dragon and everything too. It played a big role because of how much you would know the moment that Peacemaker even thought, hey, I might swing both ways. If he told his father that, his father probably would have killed him.
Yeah.
So it's ultimately more impactful. I wish that more people were talking about it, because I don't see a ton of it on TikTok, a little bit on Twitter, but not nearly enough. Enough that aspect should be kind of talked about and explored, because it is really important for representation as well.
Yeah, I agree, but I also think that part of it is that I think the people that would normally be up in arms about it choose to ignore it because they relate with so many other of the bad sides of Peacemaker. This
Right.
gun-toting, like, misogynistic prick who shoots first, asks questions later, says stupid shit like, hey, I'd love scissoring, like, oh, I'm all about, gay couples. I love scissoring. Like when he says those like really stupid comments, these are things that they like, yeah, they rally behind that in a way. And so I think that they ignore the other stuff because they want to keep loving the character because it
Right.
represents them. But the thing is, all that was actually doing was showing the worst parts of Peacemaker as he was growing as a character and not
Right.
all things he had to work with and work through. But they're too ignorant to realize that. And so they just see this representation of themselves on screen that's actually being corrected. They don't see the correction. And so I think that's probably why it's not as much discourse about it out there. But I thought it was just really well done. And I'm really looking forward to as far as season 2 goes, I honestly don't even care where it goes. Like, I don't have any expectations. I don't have any wants or desires. Whatever James Gunn does, and he's going to be directing every episode this time. He directed 5 of the 8 this past time, but he wrote every episode. With season 2, he'll be writing and directing every episode. The only thing I could want, and it's not even, if it doesn't happen, it's no big deal, is I would like to see Ratcatcher 2 back.
Oh yeah.
I think because there's also part of a redemption there between those two. Because of what happened in the Suicide Squad, where he was like, I'm thorough, so I have to kill you. That's why Amanda brought, she brought me along because I'm thorough. Which, going back to that movie, it was a question of, why are you bringing somebody who's exactly like Bloodsport? Like, and they literally make that joke where she gives Bloodsport's spiel about being tortured by his father into being a killing machine, can use any weapon. And then when she introduces him the Peacemaker, it's the exact same spiel. He's like, are you pulling my leg? What are you doing? He does exactly what I do. It's because his moral area was far lower, to where he was thorough enough that he was willing to kill and do anything for peace.
And if you look at what could, or what was arguably going to happen with this interpretation of Suicide Squad for the sequel, was, Bloodsport was supposed to be Deathstroke, or not Deathstroke, I'm sorry, Deadshot. Deadshot was supposed to come back.
Yeah.
So if you even insert, because like arguably they made Bloodsport and Deadshot very similar. If you were to drop that character in, I don't think that personally, I don't think that Will Smith could have done as well as Idris Elba did. But if you can drop the character in with those same sort of motivations, and like that same scene where like his daughter got locked up, you can have the same kind of interaction with that. And then when you would see the actual difference in character, like when they had the kind of contest of killing people walking through that camp, which is ultimately for nothing.
Yeah, but it was still a great scene.
Like, right, it was a great
Such a good scene.
While Bloodsport, and arguably I think Deadshot would have done the same thing, where his method of taking people out was very methodic and kind of like, there were trick shots, but it was more or less like, this is how good he is. But when you watch Peacemaker, he's this the entire time, and this and everything else. It's like, while someone is doing this for the sport, the other person is an asshole, and they are rubbing it in your face that they can also accomplish the same thing that you can do. So it really shows the juxtaposition of characters and stuff. So I thought that was a good segue through like what those characters are and how they're so similar, but there are differences, and the differences that set them apart ultimately play into their roles in the film's like conclusion.
Yeah, I think that I don't think that movie would have worked with Deadshot.
No,
I really
I
don't.
don't
But
think so
because
either.
part of that was you already saw him being, he was doing this for his daughter, and he was, like the whole, he was the one truly redeeming character in the first Suicide Squad movie.
Right.
Like, choosing not to kill Harley and all those stuff, and like doing everything for his daughter. Whereas in this one, I think by making Bloodshot initially seemed to not care about his daughter, and then like when she was used as a pawn, immediately like, oh no, that was a front. Like he does actually care. He just doesn't want her to end up like him.
Right.
And so, but he also doesn't know how to be a father and all that. Like there was this whole thing that was very quickly established. So I'm happy that Will Smith wasn't able to do it, because then we got Idris Elba in an amazing role. I kind of like to maybe see him back too. Like even if it's just for like a one-off like moment, and in passing kind of thing, like not necessarily throughout the whole series, but maybe just like they cross paths, or he like, hey, I know that I saw what you guys did with Amanda Waller. Just a heads up, she's on her she's on her way to get you, or
Yeah.
whatever. Something like that would be cool, I think. As we wrap this up, um, just your final thoughts on the series, and we've got a lot coming up. The Batman comes out Friday. We've got Moon Knight, at the end of the month. Doctor Strange is coming out in May. Uh, you got Black Adam, the Flash movie. So much is coming out. What are you looking forward to the most this year?
I'm most like definitely 100% into Multiverse of Madness. I think Sam Raimi is going to bring something just absolutely terrifying into that realm of Marvel that really hasn't been explored yet. Marvel's continuing success, I think, really depends on ultimately the team ups definitely really work out well for them. However, to keep movies fresh where they don't feel like recycled versions of themselves, which I was really happy about Shang-Chi not being a cookie cutter Marvel origin movie, is that you have to start doing genre films. You have to start exploring things that necessarily you wouldn't normally see in a superhero movie. So going the horror route and having Sam Raimi be the person for that, I think was a really smart choice. So that is probably the thing I'm the most excited about on the Marvel side of things. For DC, 110% Black Adam because of the Justice Society. All of that looks cool. Even Cyclone looks cool. Hawkman, Doctor Fate, Atom Smasher. I'm there for all of it. I can't wait to actually sit and watch that. And that just sets up Fury of the Gods, the second Shazam film too, which I think is that one of the
Oh
other
yeah,
things
yeah.
that DC got right. And they need to find a happy medium between what they're getting right in DC and Peacemaker like projects and Suicide Squad like projects, because you hardly exist in both of them. You have the Justice League now existing in both of them. But you have to figure out how to make this work, because when you ultimately get to the point of having team up movies in the future, are your mainstream heroes going to be squeaky clean and everyone else is going to be a little bit on the edgier side? It's going to be really difficult bringing in Peacemaker and having to tone that down for PG-13. Even some of the stuff with Harley Quinn in the Suicide Squad movie, it's going to be really hard to kind of tone that down. Even though I think Birds of Prey is a wishy-washy movie as it is, did a kind of good job with her. I just think that they have to find what that happy medium is, and they have to find it fairly soon, or you have two separate universes.
Yeah.
You really keep the Suicide Squad esque things in this area, and then you continue on the Snyder type of things, and slowly tiptoe away from that. Whether that's eliminating Batfleck and bringing Michael Keaton as your new long standing Batman, or whatever course. It really all depends on Flashpoint, right? So
Yep, that's the big
that's
key. Yeah.
another big anticipation for DC. My final thoughts on Peacemaker is bring on season two. I don't really think that there is a ceiling that he can't really break through with what he wants to bring in. I would like to I would like to see the continued representation that Peacemaker brought for bisexual men and LGBTQ community. Even if he winds up like having a passive relationship with Vigilante or something like that, if they keep exploring like that, or they keep ending up in those types of situations, I think that would be great. I really want to see this kind of take off, and the more obscure characters, the better. Like I definitely want to see Matter Eater Lad now, and couple that with Doom Patrol and what they do with zany characters and characters that you never thought you would see on screen. I think the sky's the limit, and I think that season 2 will be just as successful as season 1.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Peacemaker really opened up the doors for Warner Brothers to just maybe, instead of trying to copy what Marvel did, do their own thing. And it allows for more obscure character. It shows that obscure characters can work if you have the right team behind it. I wouldn't necessarily say put James Gunn in charge of everything, but maybe consult him at least when you're doing stuff. I'm definitely looking forward to Multiverse of Madness. Although I think I might be looking forward to Moon Knight more, just because I want to see what they do, because they're approaching the whole dissociative identity disorder and all that. It's a very unique character. It's going to be a darker series, so I'm really interested to see where that goes. I know that come March 16th, all the Netflix series and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. are ending up on Disney Plus. So some of our TikTok friends are going to probably explode over a canon discussion. I'm really hoping they put them under like Marvel Legends, like they did overseas, and not, and that kind of proves our point. But whatever. Black Adam definitely has me intrigued. Justice Society is an amazing. It's Hawkman, Doctor Fate, all. Even with like Noah Centineo, kind of a weird choice for Atom Smasher, but hopefully it'll work. We've got Michael Keaton coming back in The Flash, and he's already been seen on set of Batgirl. I'm actually more excited now about Batgirl. We got Brendan Fraser as Firefly in that, so that's really cool. That could be a very cool movie. As of right now, that's still going straight to HBO Max, but rumor has it may become a theatrical release. Because they're so like excited about what they're doing with it. We've got Blue Beetle that's supposed to be getting a movie and coming to HBO Max. So again, another slightly obscure character who got another rise to prominence thanks to the Injustice games. So there's a lot coming, especially from DC. Like Marvel, of course, always. You've got so much coming. You've got the Marvels, you've got Miss Marvel, you've got She-Hulk, you've got Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. There's so much happening.
Ironheart, Armor Wars.
Yeah, A Secret Invasion,
so much stuff.
which they're filming right now. So there's a lot coming up for, and I know some people are like, "Oh, what about comic book fatigue, superhero fatigue?" Not me.
This is all that I've ever wanted.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Who remembers getting Wizard magazine and the casting calls and the wish list and stuff? Like, there's so much. Yeah, we're getting Kang. Like, we're getting Kang the Conqueror. We're getting, there's so many things. Like, we're getting the Illuminati and freaking Multiverse of Madness. We're getting so much.
I will say, in the James Gunn, like in the James Gunn corner, there are two specific characters that I really want to see him get his hands on. I would really like to see him do. I want people to hate Deathstroke as much as I do, and I feel like if you're going to tell people the reason why they shouldn't like Deathstroke as much as they do, I think James Gunn is the proper person to do that.
I agree.
And the other one is Bane. I want to see how James Gunn does Bane, because my favorite interpretation of Bane is on the Harley Quinn animated show, because it's absolutely hilarious. And I have this very special appreciation for that Bane because it's all of the Banes put together.
Yeah.
But I want to see what James Gunn does with that, because I think we would probably have either a intensely, ridiculously accurate depiction of Bane, or you have this just completely different like turn on the character. But I'd be really interested to see what he does. I would really like to see something closer to like. I don't like Bane's character too much in Dark Knight Rises because there's a lot of problems in that movie.
Yeah.
And obviously Batman and Robin's Bane is awful. But I would like to see a comic book accurate Bane that came from James Gunn and what he could do with it.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I definitely would love to see a more comic accurate. I think because Bane is a very like a much deeper character than even people realize, and I think that like especially if you did Nightfall storyline that was supposed to be done in Dark Knight Rises, and like if you did it right, I think that could be very vastly interesting. A James Gunn version would be interesting. I wonder how he would take that character. That would be interesting. I would like to see. Oh crap! I just had the character in mind. Crap. Oh, Swamp Thing.
Oh yeah,
I think James Gunn doing Swamp Thing. Now, granted, there was that show that came out that was just too expensive for them to continue, and it was pretty good, but it was just way too expensive. It was over $1
yeah.
million an episode. They're like, we can't do that.
And that was an
So
accounting mistake. They weren't even supposed to have that.
yeah, so like I'd love to like, I think James Gunn doing a Swamp Thing would be very interesting. Because I don't think he would approach that from a comedic way either. I think he would approach that a slightly more serious way, and it would be darker. Yeah. It would be closer to his horror stuff, and I think that would be really cool to see. But there's a lot of stuff like DC. I think now will finally realize that they can do the more serious instead of trying to like rely on the Trinity, and they can really focus on some other characters to help bring them back up into like. Instead of it just being a joke all the time, like, oh, DC movies suck, and they can also go look at their animated movies because they've always gotten those right for the most part. Like most of their animated movies are just leaps and bounds better than anything Marvel's put out animated wise. Really.
Oh yeah.
So, so I think that would be really, really cool. On that note, let's go ahead and wrap it up. You've got a busy night ahead of you. Thank you so much for coming on. Once again, everybody, make sure you go follow Comic Punk Guy on TikTok and Instagram at Comic Punk Guy. Check him out there. Again, we'll be doing another Wrestle Talk podcast whenever I can get people together. We may have to not do all 5 of us again just because that scheduling is a nightmare. But we'll figure it out. We'll get it together here coming up soon. Also, everybody, if you can, next Monday will be the first episode of the Depths of Laughter podcast, talking about stand-up comedy and whatnot with my good friend Denise. So that'll be fun. Check that out as well. And next week, I will have Michael Rothman on, aka Superhero Talk. So, and we're going to discuss the Batman in great detail. So make sure you come check that out. Everybody, thanks for checking us out, and we will see you soon.
See you.